In Kigali, Rwanda, the night was glowing with celebration. The luxurious hall was decorated with golden lights, fresh flowers, and music that filled the air. Everyone had gathered for Mama Thandayo's birthday, a woman respected by many, known for her strength, wisdom, and kindness. Family members dressed in their finest clothes, business associates exchanged polite smiles, and old friends embraced warmly. The hall was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and cheerful voices. To anyone walking in, it looked like the perfect picture of unity and joy. But beneath the bright smiles and polished words, there was tension that no music could cover. Everyone knew there were cracks in this family, wounds that had never healed. Yet no one dared to mention them, not tonight. Instead, they kept their secrets tucked behind laughter, as if pretending long enough would make them disappear. Still, the whispers were there, small, sharp, and hidden behind the laughter of the guests. Mama Thandayo sat at the center table, dressed in a deep blue gown that sparkled under the lights. Her smile was gracious, but her eyes carried a heaviness that few noticed. Every now and then, she glanced toward the door, as if expecting someone to walk in. Guests raised their glasses to toast her life and achievements, and she nodded politely, but inside her heart was not at peace. The hall was grand, the celebration loud, but behind all the joy, silence carried a truth everyone was too afraid to speak. As the music played and people danced, there was something else moving quietly through the hall that no one wanted to admit. Whispers about Mama Thandayo's missing daughter, Lerato. Her name was never said loudly, but in corners and in hushed voices, guests spoke of her like a shadow. Years ago, after a bitter fallout with the family, Lerato had walked away, and since then she had been treated like a ghost, someone erased from family pictures, from stories, from memory itself. The official story was simple: she was gone for good. But deep down, no one really believed it. Some guests leaned closer to each other, lowering their voices so the family wouldn't hear. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" one whispered. Another replied, "Not after what happened." They made sure of that. Each person seemed to know a different version of the story, but none of them knew the full truth. The only thing clear was that Lerato's absence was the wound that never healed. At the family tables, whenever someone mentioned her name, the mood changed instantly. Bongani, Mama's son, would quickly laugh and shift the conversation to business or politics, pretending not to hear. Cousin Naledi would force a smile and say, "Let's not talk about the past. Tonight is about Mama." But their nervousness gave them away. Even the younger relatives, who had grown up hearing only bits and pieces, sensed that there was something dark and painful being hidden from them. And Mama Thandayo, though surrounded by people, gifts, and music, felt that silence the most. Her heart was heavy with the absence of the daughter she once held close. She smiled when guests came to greet her, but her eyes often drifted toward the door, as though she was still waiting for Lerato to walk in. In her soul, she carried both pride and guilt, pride for the family she built, guilt for the child she lost. Some of the older guests remembered Lerato clearly. They spoke softly about how she had been bright, ambitious, and full of fire. She was the kind of woman who spoke her mind, even when it hurt others. But it was exactly that fire, they said, that had clashed with her brother Bongani and torn the family apart. Still, no one dared to tell the story openly in front of Mama Thandayo. To her face, they acted as if Lerato had never existed. The hall was filled with music and laughter, but behind it all there was an invisible silence. Every toast to family unity carried the weight of someone missing. Every cheer for Mama's long life carried the echo of a daughter's name left unspoken. It was as if the party itself was trying to cover up the truth, decorating it with flowers, music, and laughter. But truth has a way of sitting quietly in the corner, refusing to be forgotten. And though the family insisted Lerato was gone for good, her absence was louder than the drums, brighter than the lights, and heavier than the silence in Mama Thandayo's eyes. Deep inside, everyone knew the story wasn't finished. Bongani moved through the hall with the confidence of a man who believed the world belonged to him. His voice was loud, his laughter even louder, and his words painted a picture of a family that was unbreakable. He stood on the stage with a glass in his hand, speaking about their family empire, their businesses, and their loyalty to one another. Guests clapped and smiled, nodding as if they truly believed every word. To anyone watching, it seemed like the Thandao family was strong, powerful, and untouchable. Naledi, the cousin, played her part well too. She moved gracefully between tables, charming the guests with soft compliments and warm smiles. She spoke of Mama Thandao's wisdom, of Bongani's leadership, and of how family comes before everything. Her words were sweet like honey, but they carried no truth. Still, the guests listened, letting themselves be wrapped in the illusion of unity. But behind those polished smiles, Bongani and Naledi knew the truth that burned like fire in their hearts. They knew the empire they boasted about was built not on loyalty but on betrayal. Lorato's name may have been buried in silence, but her shadow haunted every word they spoke. Bongani, who stood proudly in front of the guests, had stolen what was not his. The money, the businesses, the properties, things that were meant to be shared, he had taken for himself. And Naledi, standing beside him with her pretty words, had helped cover his tracks, weaving lies to protect him while Lorato was cast out as the rebellious daughter. Every time Bongani mentioned family loyalty, a few guests exchanged knowing glances. They had heard the whispers, the rumors that refused to die. But no one dared to ask questions. The Thandao family was powerful, and people knew it was safer to smile, clap, and pretend than to risk offending them. Mama Thandao sat quietly, her eyes heavy as she listened to the speeches. She wanted to believe in the picture her son and niece painted, but her heart knew the cracks were there. The more they spoke of unity, the more her chest tightened with the memory of the child who was missing. She forced a smile, but her hands trembled slightly on her lap. Bongani continued with his charm, boasting about the future, about how the family's name would live forever. He raised his glass high, declaring that nothing could ever divide them. The hall erupted in applause, but it was applause that felt forced, almost nervous. People clapped because they had to, not because they believed. Naledi leaned close to a group of guests, whispering sweet words and laughing lightly, but even she felt the weight pressing down. She knew the secrets couldn't stay hidden forever. Lies may silence a truth for a time, but they never kill it. So while the hall sparkled with lights, laughter, and speeches, the truth sat silently in the room, waiting for the moment it would finally break through the cracks Bongani and Naledi worked so hard to cover. And that moment was closer than they dared to admit. Mama Thandao sat at the center of the grand celebration, dressed in a royal blue gown that shimmered under the lights. Her jewelry sparkled, her smile looked warm, and her presence demanded respect. To everyone in the hall, she seemed like the perfect picture of a proud mother and matriarch, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, friends, and business partners. People approached her table with gifts and words of honor, calling her a queen, a role model, a blessing to the community. She accepted every compliment with a nod and a gentle smile. But behind that smile, her heart carried a weight she could not hide from herself. Every now and then, as laughter filled the air and music played, her eyes wandered to the door. It was almost unnoticeable, just a small glance, but those who paid attention saw it. It was as if she was waiting for someone to walk in, someone who never came. That silent expectation carried a story that few dared to speak of, and fewer dared to ask about. Because everyone in the room knew whose name hung heavy in the silence. Lorato. The pain of a mother is different from any other pain. Mama Thandao had given life to Lorato, had raised her with love, had dreamed of seeing her grow into a woman of strength. But years ago, their bond had been torn apart by betrayal, by anger, by choices that left scars on both sides. Since then, Lorato had disappeared, and the family had treated her absence as a closed chapter. To them, speaking her name was forbidden. To Mama, however, silence never erased the wound. Some guests noticed the sadness in her eyes, the way her smile didn't always reach her heart. A few older women exchanged quiet glances, whispering, "She's thinking about the missing one." Younger guests who didn't know the full story only sensed that there was something unspoken, a tension that sat beneath the celebration. But no one dared to break the unspoken rule. Mentioning Lerato would be like dropping fire in the middle of the party. Even Bongani and Naledi, who were busy keeping the illusion of family unity alive, noticed the way Mama's gaze kept drifting. It unsettled them, but they said nothing. Instead, they spoke louder, laughed harder, and pushed the party forward, hoping to bury the silence in noise. But Mama couldn't bury it. Her heart ached for her daughter. Every candle lit in her honor reminded her of the one who wasn't there. Every cheer for family made her think of the child who had been pushed out of it. In her chest, pride and grief lived side by side. She was proud of what she had built, yet broken by what she had lost. And so, though she smiled for her guests and accepted their praise, Mama Thandau's eyes told another story. They told the story of a mother who could never stop waiting, who could never stop hoping, even when hope felt like pain. Her silence was louder than the music, and her sadness was the secret that wrapped itself around the entire hall. The celebration had reached its brightest moment. Music played, guests laughed, and waiters rolled in the massive birthday cake decorated with golden flowers and candles. Everyone turned their eyes toward Mama Thandau, ready to sing, ready to cheer, ready to capture the perfect moment. The hall sparkled with joy, and for a second, it looked like nothing could disturb the night. But then the doors swung open. A sudden hush fell over the room. Every head turned. Every smile froze. Gasps echoed across the hall as a tall, elegant figure stepped inside. It was Lerato. She was dressed in a flowing gown of deep red silk, the kind of dress that caught the light with every movement. Her hair framed her face perfectly. Her makeup was flawless, and her presence was so powerful that even the chandeliers seemed dim compared to her glow. She didn't walk in quietly. She carried herself with a confidence that demanded attention. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as the entire hall held its breath. Whispers broke out immediately. "Is that Lerato? It can't be." She came back. Some guests covered their mouths in shock, while others quickly looked toward the family table, waiting to see how they would react. Mama Thandau's eyes widened, her heart pounding in her chest. For years she had dreamed of this moment, imagined her daughter walking through that very door. And now it was real. Tears threatened to fall, but she held them back, her hands trembling slightly on the table. Bongani was the first to move, his face twisted with anger as he stood, his voice sharp. "You don't belong here," he shouted, trying to block her path. Naledi quickly followed, stepping in front of Lerato as if to push her away before she could come closer. But Lerato didn't flinch. Her eyes, burning with both hurt and strength, stayed locked on her mother. She didn't rush. She didn't shout. She simply kept walking, her presence louder than any word. The room was so tense that even the music had stopped, the silence pressing on everyone's chest. Some guests leaned closer to one another, whispering furiously, "This is going to destroy everything. Why did she come back now? Did you see Mama's face?" Others simply sat frozen, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe. Lerato's voice finally broke the silence. It was calm, soft, but filled with weight. "I didn't come to ruin a celebration," she said, her eyes never leaving her mother. "I came because the truth cannot stay outside forever." The words rippled through the hall like thunder. Some gasped again, some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and others looked down, unable to meet her gaze. The cake, once the center of attention, now stood forgotten. All eyes were on Lerato, the daughter who was supposed to be gone for good, but had returned at the very moment the family wanted her hidden most. And in that single moment, the entire hall knew, the night would never be the same again. The hall was thick with silence, broken only by the sharp echo of Bongani's voice. He stepped forward, his face twisted with rage, his chest rising and falling as if Lerato's very presence was choking him. Pointing at her, he shouted, "You don't belong here. Leave before you destroy this night." His words cut through the air, and every guest felt the tension snap tighter. Gasps rippled through the hall. Some guests covered their mouths, others turned their eyes toward Mama Thandau, waiting for her to say something. But Mama sat frozen, her hands trembling in her lap, her eyes wide with pain. The birthday celebration had turned into something no one expected, and no one knew how to stop it. Lorato didn't move. She stood tall, her red gown glowing under the lights, her expression calm but her eyes burning with both hurt and fire. She looked straight at Bongani, unshaken by his anger. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the hall with a strength that silenced even the whispers. "I didn't come to ruin anything," she said softly. "I came for the truth." The room seemed to stop breathing. Some guests leaned forward, their eyes wide, desperate to hear what would come next. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something long buried was about to break open. Bongani laughed bitterly, but the sound was hollow. "Truth," he snapped. "You abandoned this family. You walked away years ago. And now you dare show your face on this day, in front of everyone, pretending you have a right to be here." His voice grew louder, almost desperate, as if he was trying to convince the guests as much as himself. Lorato's gaze never wavered. She stepped closer, her heels clicking slowly against the floor, every step like a drumbeat of defiance. "I didn't walk away," she replied, her voice steady. "I was pushed out, lied about, erased." Her words hit the hall like thunder, and a murmur spread through the crowd. Some guests glanced nervously at one another. The stories they had heard in whispers, the ones about Lorato, about the family secrets, suddenly didn't feel like rumors anymore. Naledi quickly jumped in, trying to calm things down, her voice sweet but trembling. "Cousin, please, this is Mama's special day. If you care for her at all, you will leave us in peace." But Lorato turned her eyes briefly toward Naledi, her expression sharp. "Peace built on lies isn't peace," she said. Mama Thandio's eyes filled with tears. She pressed a hand to her chest, torn between the son who stood before her in fury and the daughter whose pain echoed in every word. The guests watched in silence, their hearts pounding as if they were part of the confrontation themselves. It was no longer just a party. It was a battlefield of truth and lies. And in that moment it was clear, Lorato had not returned to be silent. She had returned to speak, no matter how much it shook the walls around her. The hall felt like it was holding its breath. Lorato stood at the center, her voice steady but heavy with years of pain. She looked around the room, her eyes meeting the shocked faces of family, friends, and business associates. Then, slowly, she began to speak the words everyone thought would never be heard. "You want to know why I left," she said, her voice carrying across the silence. "It wasn't because I was disobedient. It wasn't because I wanted to break this family. It was because Bongani stole what was mine, my inheritance, my future." The guests gasped. Hands covered mouths, chairs shifted, whispers raced from one table to another. Bongani's face went pale, then red with anger, but before he could speak, Lorato continued. "He took the properties that Papa left for me. He took the money that was meant for my education and for the life I was supposed to build. And when I tried to fight for myself, Naledi stood beside him, covering the lies with her sweet words. Together they painted me as the bad daughter, the selfish one, the disobedient one, so no one would believe me." Naledi froze where she stood, her smile breaking, her hands trembling. Some guests turned their eyes on her, disappointment clear in their faces. A few even shook their heads, whispering that they had always suspected something wasn't right. Mama Thandio's body shook as she listened. Tears welled in her eyes, her hand pressed against her mouth to stop a sob from escaping. Her gaze shifted from Bongani to Lorato, torn between the son who had stood proudly by her side all these years and the daughter she had lost because of secrets buried in silence. Bongani tried to laugh, though his voice cracked. "Lies. All lies. She came back only to destroy us. Look at her. She's bitter, jealous, and desperate. Don't believe a word she says." But the guests weren't convinced. Murmurs spread through the hall like fire. Some whispered, "It makes sense now." Others muttered, "That's why she left." Suspicion filled the air, and the once perfect image of Bongani began to crumble in front of everyone. Lorato took a deep breath, her voice trembling now with emotion. "Do you know what it feels like to be erased by your own family? To be called disobedient when all you wanted was fairness? I was not the rebel you were told I was. I was the victim of greed, covered by lies. The hall erupted in uneasy noise, guests shifting, whispering, some even glaring at Bongani and Naledi. The air was thick with judgment, betrayal, and disbelief. Mama Thandiwe finally let the tears fall, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Is this true?" Her words were not just a question, they were a mother's cry, torn between love for her children and the pain of realizing one of them had betrayed the other. The cracks that had been hidden for years were no longer cracks. They were wide, gaping wounds, and everyone in the hall could see them now. The family's perfect mask had shattered, and the truth was spilling into the open. The hall had already been shaken by Lerato's words, but what came next turned the entire celebration upside down. Just as Bongani tried to laugh off her claims, the doors opened again. A tall man in a dark suit walked in, carrying a leather briefcase. His steps were calm but firm, and every eye in the hall followed him as he made his way to Lerato's side. "This is my lawyer," Lerato said, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly. "And he didn't come empty-handed." The lawyer placed the briefcase on the nearest table, opened it, and carefully pulled out a thick stack of files. He laid them out one by one: bank records, property deeds, letters, and signed documents. The sound of papers hitting the table echoed like a drumbeat of truth. The guests leaned forward, whispering, craning their necks to see. "These are the accounts," Lerato continued, lifting a page for everyone to notice. "Here you can see the money that was transferred out of my name into Bongani's. And here," she held up another document, "the deed of the property Papa left for me, signed over under false pretenses. And this," she pointed at a letter, "a forged agreement written to make it look like I gave it all up willingly. I never signed it. That's not my handwriting. This is the proof I was robbed." The hall erupted. Guests gasped loudly. Some even stood from their chairs. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "She has evidence. Look at the signatures. It's all true." Bongani's face drained of color, then burned red again as he slammed his hand against the table. "These documents mean nothing," he shouted. "This is a setup. Lies brought here to humiliate me." But the lawyer spoke calmly, his voice carrying authority. "These records are certified copies. The court has already verified them. Everything Miss Lerato says is true." The room shifted instantly. Some guests clapped in quiet support of Lerato, nodding as if justice had finally spoken. Others stared at Bongani and Naledi with visible disappointment, their eyes sharp with judgment. The same people who had praised them minutes earlier now looked at them as if they were strangers. Naledi tried to speak, her voice weak. "Please don't listen to her, she's twisting everything." But even as she said it, her hands shook, and her eyes darted nervously. No one believed her. Mama Thandiwe covered her face with her hands. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "My children, what have you done?" Her body trembled as the weight of betrayal crushed her spirit. Lerato, though her voice shook with emotion, stood tall. "I didn't come for revenge. I came because I could no longer allow lies to bury me alive." She looked at the crowd, her eyes shining with both pain and strength. The cake, the music, the laughter, all of it was forgotten. What remained was the truth laid bare on the table, undeniable and unshakable. No matter how loudly Bongani shouted, the papers spoke louder. And in that hall, everyone knew the celebration had turned into a reckoning. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of Mama Thandiwe's sobs. She sat trembling in her chair, her hands pressed against her chest as though trying to hold her breaking heart together. The guests, who had come to celebrate her life, now watched her unravel in front of them. No one moved, no one spoke. All eyes were on the mother caught between the children she loved and the truth she could no longer deny. Her tears fell freely as she finally lifted her head. Her eyes were red, her voice shaky but strong enough to cut through the air. She turned to Bongani first. "You," she whispered, almost choking on the word. "You were my pride, my son who I believed would carry this family forward. And yet, you tried to bury your sister alive with lies." Her voice grew louder, fueled by pain. "You stole what was not yours, and you let me think she was the one who broke this family." Bongani's mouth opened, but no words came out. His confidence had vanished. His hands clenched at his sides, his face pale with shame. Mama then turned to Naledi. "And you," she said, her voice trembling even harder. "You were like a daughter to me. I trusted you with my home, my family, my heart. And you chose to cover his betrayal with your lies. Do you know what that did to me? Do you know how many nights I cried for Lerato, thinking she abandoned me? All because you too wanted to protect your greed." Naledi's eyes filled with tears. She tried to reach out, but Mama pulled her hand back sharply. The rejection was louder than any word. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A woman in the front row whispered, "All these years, all the speeches about loyalty, about family, they were all lies." Others nodded, murmuring about how truth always finds its way to the light. Mama's voice broke again, softer now but piercing. "I am ashamed that under my roof, such betrayal could grow. Ashamed that I let myself be blinded by love for my son while my daughter suffered alone. But the truth cannot stay hidden forever. Tonight it has spoken." She turned her eyes to Lerato, who stood silently, her face wet with tears. Mama's lips trembled as she whispered, "Forgive me, my child. Forgive me for not seeing. Forgive me for believing them instead of you." Lerato's own tears fell as she shook her head gently. "Mama, I didn't come for revenge. I came because I needed you to know the truth." The hall was filled with raw emotion. Guests clutched their chests, some wiping their eyes as they watched the family's walls of deception crumble before them. The grand party had turned into a courtroom of truth, with Mama Thandai as both the judge and the broken heart at the center. And in that moment, everyone knew, this was no longer a celebration. It was the day lies died, and truth finally claimed its place. The hall was silent, every eye fixed on the broken family at the center. Lerato took a deep breath and stepped closer to her mother. Her heels echoed softly against the marble floor, but her voice was even softer, trembling with love and pain. She reached for Mama Thandai's hands, holding them gently as tears filled her eyes. "Mama," she whispered, "I didn't return for revenge. I returned for love and for truth." The words struck the hall like lightning. Mama Thandai let out a sob that shook her entire body. For years she had carried the weight of lies, but in that moment, she saw her daughter not as the rebellious child she was told she was, but as the one who had carried pain alone. With trembling arms, she pulled Lerato into her embrace, holding her as though she would never let her go again. Their tears mixed, and for the first time in years, the silence between them was broken. The guests, moved by the scene, began to clap. Some stood, applauding with tears in their eyes. The sound filled the hall louder and louder, until it drowned out the shame that hung over Bongani and Naledi. They stood frozen, their heads bowed, stripped of the power they once held. That night was no longer about cake or music or speeches. It became the night when truth rose from the shadows and love conquered lies. Lerato did not just reclaim her place as a daughter. She stood as the one who carried the family's true honor, the one who proved that truth may be buried for a time, but it always rises. And in the arms of her mother, she finally found her home again.